For the next 5 weeks, I'm going to enjoy studying koans. And today and next week, I'm putting out some excerpts from this book called Shoyoroku. And this is the original book I study with. And then I'm currently utilizing this translation by Thomas Clary, Book of Serenity, just for the references. In this community, I think many people know what umeboshi is. It's a pickled plum. I usually utilize the analogy of osobuko for koan study, because these are such a wonderful juicy stuff. And you chew and chew and chew and chew, and you still have some flavor coming out. But in my mind, I'm actually thinking about the umeboshi. This is the type of the thing outside of Japanese culture I have a problem to eat. At the beginning, it's kind of sour and tangy, right? And then you eat, actually this is something we eat every morning in temple. And then, you know, Japan is such a wealthy country by now, but when I was growing up, we still didn't have like, you know, confectionery for 3 o'clock, you know, dessert time. So very often with green tea, umeboshi was served. So as a child, you eat the, you know, meat. This is a plum fruit, right? You eat the meat, and then you keep the pit. There's a really hard pit inside. And you chew it and chew it and chew it, and it still comes out, like flavor comes out. And when you are just tossing around in your mouth for like an hour or two, eventually this hard pit is crackable, and you can bite it. And then inside the you know, pit, there's 2 layers. And then the first layer is really delicious. And inside there's another core. And that actually gives you such a delicious flavor too. For me, koan is just like that. So I hope I can kind of take that flavor out and then have you enjoy that flavor as well. So today, the first koan I'd like to introduce is case number 2. And this is titled as Bodhidharma's Emptiness. And this is something almost everybody knows this story. It's a story of Bodhidharma coming to China. Now, let me just read the case portion. As you probably remember, Shoyoroku, Book of Serenity, basically has 3 big blocks. The main block is the case, so to speak. This is the koan. This is a dialogue portion. And then at the beginning, there's an introduction portion. And at the end, the 3rd block is verse about this case. So as I really have a very little time, oh, I forgot to bring the clock, so please give me a cue. Yeah, thank you. I have a tendency to go on and on and on and on, so you have to stop me at one point. As I have a limited time and limited weeks to talk about, I'm just going to do just excerpts. But if you're really interested, I keep offering this Monday, what we call Dharma Lab. And then I talk about the one koan for like 3 to 4 weeks. Continuously, taking out this portion, taking out this portion, and explain it really in detail. As a matter of fact, when I mentioned it last week, one of the Sangha members actually joined us. So if you're interested, please shoot me an email later, and I can give you Zoom information. But anyway, this koan's main portion is translated as Emperor Wu of Lian asked great teacher Bodhidharma, "What is the highest meaning of the holy truth?" Bodhidharma said, "Empty, there's no holy." As a matter of fact, that's the type of the voice they always use. But as a matter of fact, I don't think Bodhidharma actually had that kind of temperament. I think my voice will be, Bodhidharma said, "Empty, there's no holy." And then the emperor said, who are you facing me? And Bodhidharma said, don't know. But I would say, don't know. The emperor didn't understand. Bodhidharma subsequently crossed the Yangtze River. This is Yosuko in Japanese. Came to Shorinji in Japanese, and faced a wall for 9 years. That's the story. And usually, Koan is a brief dialogue of a much longer dialogue. So it's almost like, watching Star Wars or Indiana Jones. You need a prequel and sequel to understand this. So this is the conversation out of 3 dialogues. And out of 3 dialogues, it's chopped into 2 dialogues. So I'm going to go back to the full dialogue. So what happened was this Bodhidharma is supposed to be a really great teacher from India. And Lian dynasty, around that time, there was this emperor called Emperor Wu, who was really interested in Buddhism. So he really was so excited about the news about this great guy from India coming to China. And then previously, this emperor really wanted to contribute to Buddhism. So therefore, he built immense numbers of Buddhist temples and large structures and decorated into a really beautiful decoration. And then enticed many, many people to get ordained and becoming monks. So therefore, he really felt he was really like a emperor of Buddhism as well. So he's really excited. So then invites, this man, Bodhidharma, and very excitedly, and asked the first question. Well, I've done so much to the Buddhism. I gave so much money and built so many temples, etc., etc. So what kind of merits do I get? And then to that, he says, mukudoku, which means, well, no merit. People often say Bodhidharma seems to be kind of a social man and don't really have a social skill. And also, he probably didn't speak Chinese very well. And of course, as you probably know, Bodhidharma is a bit like a fantastically created persona. Most possibly, this is the type of the personality later on people created out of 2 or 3 historically existing people. But as Okumaru Roshi always says, Zen stories are all made up, and therefore it is more interesting because it's really like a condensed essence in these dialogues. And then I'm just going to go back to this later, but I'm just going to introduce the conversation first. So then the emperor feels, what? I thought you were like a great sage, great sacred man. And then you tell me such a thing. I contributed so much to the Buddhism, and I thought Buddhism would give me merits. And who the I'm sorry, I'm going to who the hell? Who the hell are you? And that was the next dialogue. And to that, he says, Fushiki. Fushiki is a very interesting word. Shiki is the, in translation in Heart Sutra, that's a consciousness. So Fushiki here translated don't know, but it means such a thing doesn't even come up in my consciousness, meaning you are sacred man, famous one, etc., etc., respected man. I don't actually even think about I'm famous, I'm respected, I'm a sage, I'm sacred. And then Emperor Wu is further held back, like, ooh, strange. But he tries again and he says, so tell me, Mac for dummy kind of thing. Tell me in one word, what's the most important thing with the Buddhism? And then he uses the word kakunen musho, and that's it translated as a empty. There's no holy. So I'm sorry, the Fushiki portion is actually the 3rd conversation, but I kind of skipped to 2nd and 3rd is reversed, but it's okay. I'll explain later. So, Kakunen Musho, I explained that my original background was a Rinzai school because I was born in Rinzai town. And for the first time, I actually heard this story. This is the type of the story you hear as a child, right? Then this story, like Kakunen Musho, sounds so mysterious. And it's like only very, very enlightened person can actually understand. Then I started to study under, Soto school teachers, and then they actually explained these words in detail. First of all, kakunen musho has two portions. Kakunen is a very interesting word. It's originally, in East and West ancient times, or until medieval time, most of the city was walled, right? We still have those remnants of those towns in Germany and Italy and etc. etc. And then this wall, outside of the wall, is kakunen. So in another word, what's actually he's trying to say is breaking the wall, and then there's musho. So therefore, this wall is our concept. Our concept creates I versus you, this versus this, sacred, ordinary, smart, damn, uh, success, failure, etc., etc. But if I break down that the preconcept, actually, there's no musho, so therefore, no sacred, no ordinary. So that's what he's talking about. So as all of my teachers always mentions, every single Buddhist text, highly trusted, authentic Buddhist text, talks about only one thing, which is what this is and how we should be in this. So regarding that, I'm going to go back to the first question again. Mukudoku, no merit. So this is something, on Wednesdays, Hoko-san is leading the group of the people reading Homeless Kodo. And then currently we are almost towards the end of the book. And then last week we had this portion about Tato no kaneai nashi, which is translated as not in relationship with others. And in translation, it's a little confusing. But what Uchiyama Roshi was talking about is it's really in sync with Dogen talks about all the time, particularly in Zuimonki, which is we are reading every morning. He always talks about there's a value system in the secular world vis-a-vis how we see the world in Buddha Dharma. In value system, secular world is of course I versus other people. So almost like a goal of this secular world is I get richer and richer and richer and more famous, more and more powerful, then we will be happy. So it's always we are kind of placing ourselves in vis-a-vis other people's value. So when other people say this is bad, I try to do something else so that other people will see me as good, etc., etc. So Tato no kaneai nashi, not in relationship with others, not just only talking about the shikantaza, because shikantaza is really the foundation of our life, but also it is really about the life without this value system. In other words, this is a value system of bartering and trading, right? So Mukudoku is talking about that. It's really interesting how our teachers, current teachers, really rephrases this into something really understandable. And once you really start to see, kind of deepen your understanding and deepen your practice, your view of the world really start to shift from this bartering side to kind of different way, yes? And we all, I believe all of us actually experience it in our own life. But around the time I met Okumura Roshi, this is around the millennium, 2000, 2001-ish, I was going back and forth between San Francisco and New York to try to study with Zen Hospice Project, and that's around the time I met Okumura Roshi, who was living in San Francisco Zen Center. My life was hugely challenged because I used to work for this really competitive corporate. Okumura Roshi and I are 6 or 7 years apart, but we basically grew up in this post-war Japan, who suddenly went into this almost like economic animal kind of boom. And it was such a huge competitive world. And then Okumura Roshi was earlier on really recognized, no, this isn't the way how I should live in the world. But I was really sucked into the culture, and I competed and competed and competed. I went to this really good university, and I competed and graduated from a good score, so that I can compete to get into this wonderful, corporate, famous corporate. And then within this just matter of years, I want to grasp this, position, and etc. etc. And then that was really challenged because of this AIDS epidemic, and keep seeing all really like clearly bruised by this manifestation of impermanence. So my interest was really starting to change. And then there was a moment around the time I met Okumura Roshi. I was offered a full-time job for hospice organization. And also, I was also offered by a bank in Japan to make it possible for me to build our own hospice project in my hometown in Japan. Then I realized the salary I get from a hospice is 1/5 of the salary I was making in a previous job. And then also, if I really go ahead with building this hospice project, I will probably be able to complete paying the mortgage around the year 90 years old. So which means I just have to go on and on and on and on. Did it matter? Interestingly, around that time, I think it was probably because I was really soaking in this type of a teaching. Actually, it didn't matter. And I was really happy shifting to that. So, but only sometime later, I really recognized, oh, so what really was happening was this teaching is really coming into me and starting to kind of shift and transform my way of viewing it. I have to tell you, there are several people told me they're really interested in my story about my clinical experiences. It's a hard job, and it's a very low-paid job, and it's a very physical job. So if you're really inspired to do this, you really have to nail this teaching. And then you really have to find out what exactly happiness of your life means. Yeah. Next portion, 確年無償. I immediately go into this image of right after 9/11. This is all around the same time as I met Okumura Roshi, and I just started to shift my view of Buddhism, etc., etc. So it's a very powerful time. I mentioned about my experience of standing 7 blocks away from World Trade Center when the first building collapsed. After that, there are so many interesting teachings. Buddhist teaching is about life. It's not about separated thing about something you do in the Zendo. It is about your life. After all, we are practicing life and we're studying life. So therefore, life itself really gives you so many cues if you are really, paying attention. After a few days, we recognized no one's coming back from World Trade Center. The first portion was we were all summoned to St. Vincent Hospital, which started to open up their whole floor for emergency care, thinking there will be many people will be brought over from World Trade Center to the hospital. But then after a day or two, well, I guess we lingered until third day, we realized actually everyone died, so no one's coming to the hospital. And then we started to recognize many people in our neighborhood also died. My neighborhood was just a borderline between Tribeca And so therefore, we didn't have to evacuate, but many people who worked in World Trade Center area was commuting. Sometimes they can actually commute on foot. So many people in my neighborhood died. And then my neighborhood is a dog neighborhood. All of us have dogs. So we walk dogs, and then, this is an old neighborhood. So we have a brownstone building. So therefore, there's a, what's the English? Stoop. There's a stairs, right? Several stairs, because this is from those time of carriage, horse was going through. So main entrance is a little lifted, not on the ground floor. So therefore, when we walk dogs, and that's the best place for dogs to lift their legs. So we always regard these stoops as, like something kind of ordinary and something kind of dirty, etc., etc. Interesting thing happened. Third day, stoop after stoop, this building across the street, that building 1 block away, stoop was started to be decorated with all these flowers and candles. Suddenly, these ordinary stoops became a sacred altar. This was a very powerful teaching. There was this woman who had a beautiful high heel. And I always remember her walking towards the subway station. She just goes pop, 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 pop. And I was like, wow, that's so cool. She can walk like that with that high heel. She died. She was some kind of financial person. And then across the street, there was this really gentle, middle-aged gay man who was a firefighter. And then he died. So on his stoop and on her stoop, I'm remembering this particularly because those two stoops are my dog's pee site. And then suddenly, this became like a beautiful sacred place. It really depends on how you regard things, what's ordinary, what's sacred. And then it really makes you think. Excuse me. Some time ago, I think it was in one of the talks of Okumura Roshi, or he might have wrote it in the book I read, but when Okumura Roshi traveled from Japan to the United States, we have 2 international airports in Tokyo area, and in Narita Airport, we have North Wing and South Wing. And the North Wing is the flight that goes to north. And to come to the United States from Tokyo, you have to go to north and go close to North Pole to come down to New York or wherever it is, Minneapolis or wherever it is. So in our mind, we are going to north. And Okumura Roshi says, well, when he was flying almost close to North Pole and looking down from the window, and he just had this thought about, well, where's the north when we are flying over North Pole? And it just really cracked me up because, every time I usually go back to Japan once or twice a year. And then every time I go back, I try to stay up for this 13 hours long flight. But towards the end of the 13 hours, you start to get really tired. And you start to wake up when the announcement comes. And the announcement says, now we are flying on top of Japanese islands. As you know, Japan is a collection of over 300 islands. And then in my mind, Japan looks this way. But when you're approaching from north to south, Japan looks this way. So on the screen, announcement says, we are flying over Japan, and you wake up and you look at the screen and go, nah, that's not Japan. It's very interesting how our fixated concept works. So this is something I think we can really chew on. And from our practice point of view, we are doing, our practice is often regarded as a bodhisattva practice. So it is not about understanding kakunen musho. Oh, that's right. Now I understand that. This is a theological understanding. It's not like that. It is really more about, so our concept, pre-concept is basically like there's a word Al Gore used, inconvenient truth. That's such a wonderful word, inconvenient truth about the climate change. I always feel this is like a convenient false. So it is sometimes convenient to utilize this to do our bodhisattva work. For instance, you know, coming to hospice program is such a daunting thing for the patients. In my own hospice project, I did intake interviews more than 100 times in the last 15 years or so. And in America, where I worked as a full-time hospice chaplain, I worked in the hospice residence. Hospice residence was my main office. So people have to really give up their apartment and give up their house they are very familiar with. They have to come in to this utterly strange environment. And in that time, there's this thing about, oh, I don't like this place. This thing should be this way. And then at that, for instance, some Italian men will come like, I have such a delicious spaghetti in my home, but this place, spaghetti sucks. And at that time, you can't say, "가그는 무쇼." That's not bodhisattva work. But instead, you can utilize that. In another word, it's like our familiarity we hang on to. And then it can be, wonderful, so to speak, protection system for those people who are in transition. So therefore, you can actually skillfully utilize it, saying, oh, what kind of spaghetti do you actually like? I make really great spaghetti. I can give you spaghetti really nicely. And then eventually, that really becomes some sort of bridge and transitional time, etc., etc. So I think all of this teaching, after you really clearly see what this is talking about, next job we as a student have to do is how to incorporate it, not from my side of understanding, but how does it really work as a temporary support system, etc., etc. So this is a really interesting portion. Next one, I'm sorry, this is kind of reversed, but a fushiki portion. It doesn't even come to my mind portion, which is, the answer question to, I have heard you're a very famous, great, sacred person. And who the hell are you? And he says, fushiki, I don't know. This portion immediately makes me remember one of my close friends is someone whose name is Jeffrey Hopkins. He is Tibetan equivalent to my teacher Okumaro Roshi does for Dogen study. He has translated immense numbers of Tibetan teaching into English. And then, he's 83 years old now. And then he's currently going through cancer treatment. So before I came to Bloomington, at this age, anything could happen. So I make it the rule when my friends say, I'm currently going through some treatments, etc. I always go visit them because I never know. So I went to see Jeffrey in Charlottesville 1 month before I came here. And then I had a long conversation. And one of the conversation about the Dalai Lama, this was a very interesting conversation. Jeffrey told me some years ago, New York Times made this column interviewing very famous people, like a head of this new venture or corporate, and the head of this and head of that, politicians and financial people, etc., celebrities and music and theater, etc. And then asking them, how would you like to be remembered? And then this column was written by somewhat youngish writer who is still into this, I work for New York Times. I have my own column and I'm interviewing all these wild famous people kind of energy. So Jeffrey was an interpreter at that time for Dalai Lama. So the New York Times writer comes and explains, and then Jeffrey translating to this to Dalai Lama. Dalai Lama starts to understand what the intention of it, and then he stops this interviewer like, "Oh no, 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 that is so bad for my practice." And then New York Times writer got a little offended because she thought what she's doing is such a wonderful tribute to all these wonderful, successful, famous people. And why is this man is really rejecting it? And then she says, you will be compared with such and such and such and such. These are really well-known names. And then Dalai Lama said, no, that's not our practices. This is very interesting. We don't really practice to become famous. It's again tato no kaneai, vis-a-vis other people, how they view. That's not our origin. That's not our foundation. But that's not our foundation of aspiration or practice. So this is such a short three, dialogues, but it really illuminates what it is and how to be. It's a very interesting koan. I keep taking more and more things out of this koan. So I could go on and on and on for 3 weeks on this, but I'm going to switch to the next one. Next one is, excuse me, am I okay? 15 or more minutes. Okay, so maybe I can do the next one. Isn't koan study fun? I think so. It's really juicy. It's like keeping umeboshi pit in my mouth, hoping it will break and give me a really core flavor. Case number 3. Case number 3 is translated as the invitation of the patriarch to Eastern India. Language-wise, it's really kind of troublesome. I kind of like to tell you this as a bit of anecdote to keep your interest. I have heard from one of the recordings of Uchiyama Roshi talking about, when you study Buddhist texts, you kind of have to understand Indian characteristics and inclination and habits, and Chinese inclination and habits and characteristics, and they are just completely different, So you mentioned, I didn't say this, so I'm just delivering what Uchiyama Roshi said, okay? So I didn't say it. Uchiyama Roshi said when he started to study Paricanon, he felt, Paricanon is separated into 3 categories. And this category means basket, right? So there's a basket of sutra, basket of Abhidharma, basket of Vinaya. And then he was starting to read it. It goes like anya nya 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 anya nya 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 anya nya 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 nya. He thought, wow, this is a basket of trash. And then he pulls it out, and it's like there's an image of he pulls out nya 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 nya, and then put it into the basket. So instead of this is a sutra basket, this is like a waste basket until I didn't say it, okay? It's Uchiyama Roshi said it, but until Uchiyama Roshi said, oh, but inside of this, all these, decorated repetition, etc., and decoratives and rhetorics, etc. There's a core portion, just like a bright jewel. And when you can actually pull it out and taste it and process it and really rub it on you, it's a great teaching. And then, on the other hand, my problem with reading Chinese text is because of the completely opposite nature of the language. Instead of completely opposite to Indian text, it's just so succinct, and so succinct, so much so I miss so many things. So what I have to do is instead of taking all this trash out and finding a core, you have to pull it out and just see this, like layers of layers of layers of this one word. So it's the process is completely different. So then, of course, when you translate it, all of that layer loses. So don't feel discouraged when you just study with translation. please come to our group. I'll explain. So this one, the core case, you wouldn't understand, I wouldn't understand if I just read this core translation. It says, a Raja of an East Indian country invited the 27th Buddhist patriarch Prajnatara to a feast. The Raja asked him, why don't you read the scriptures, give us teaching? Oh, just so you know what this is meaning. When somebody is invited, you are supposed to give a teaching or you read sutra. Like right now in Japan, most of the time, Buddhist temple priests are invited to lay people's house and then you recite the sutras, right? And then after that, they offer you a meal. And then instead, in this case, this great teacher, again, a highly revered and highly popular teacher. So therefore, this Raja invited him, thinking he's going to teach, or he's going to at least recite sutras, or give it a teaching. Instead, without doing that, he immediately goes into the feast. So he starts to eat the meal before. So it's not, he's not really bartering, I give you the teaching, so I receive the meal kind of thing. So this is the whole foundation of this kind of trick of reading this case. So Raja asked him, well, I gave you such a fine meal, and you haven't said the word. Why don't you give us teaching? And then the patriarch said, this poor wayfarer doesn't dwell in the realm of the body or mind. When breathing in, doesn't get involved in myriad circumstances. When breathing out, I always reiterate such a scripture, hundreds, thousands, millions of scrolls. Well, with this translation, it really doesn't really make much sense. But what it is talking about, when you really examine the language, there are two layers. One of them is there's a saying called a saying that goes, exhaling breath is not waiting for inhaling breath. Inhaling breath is not waiting for exhaling breath. In another word, I don't inhale expecting this reward of exhaling the breath. I don't exhale the breath because the breath is not expecting a treat of inhaling. That's one layer. Another layer is, of course, we are always so wrapped into this sense of me, aren't we? I am. And then I always have to come to some point of like, oops, I did this again. Uchiyama Roshi mentions 発信100万発でしたかな ?100 万発。100万発 is a million times. So you have to do this, oops, 1 million times a day. And that's how he talks about. And it is not really about Zazen. In Zazen, we do this, oops. And we just, okay, I was fantasizing. I was thinking about, etc., etc. But we do this all the time in our regular life. And then we are always catching ourselves, I was really thinking about this from my aspect so that I can maneuver this in favor of my way, etc., etc. That portion. Then we always forget this breath is not my breath. So in another word, this is something Sawaki Roshi and Uchiyama Roshi always talks about. You really have to clarify and recognize the fact that you are not really ordering your heart to keep on beating when you are sleeping. But despite the fact you are not really making any effort, your heart keeps on beating and your lungs keep on exhaling and exhaling, inhale. We always forget this entire universe is actually supporting us, completely supporting us for us to be here right now. So that is actually the teaching, because what Gautama Buddha was awakened to is this just true reality. He didn't invent anything out of his own consciousness or etc. etc. He just simply awakened back into what has been always been here, and he's trying to really, describe it to us so that they can help us to also recognize our breath is continuously going on, even if we are completely unconscious. So, when you wake up, especially at this age, after going through all these, ailment and illness and hospitalization and watching other people going through this, etc., etc., each morning I wake up and I feel like, wow, I'm still awake, I'm alive. This is amazing. And I think essentially Buddhist practice and Buddhist teaching is really about clearly appreciating the fact that everything is actually supporting us completely to be here right now. And what do we do with it? Yeah. This one, I have 2 episodes I'd like to share. Around the time I met Okumura Roshi, I was studying under this man whose name is Franco Stasisky. For those of you who are interested in my workshop offered in June, one of the books I'm recommending you to read is Frank's book called Five Invitations. And Frank technically is a teacher from Theravada school, new insight meditation teacher. But he used to live in San Francisco Zen Center, and he's a really big fan of Dogen's writing. So his book actually opens up, and then first portion, introduction, is a quotation from Dogen's Shoji, Life Death. And then, I followed him around when I was an intern for years. And then he always does this in one of those workshops. And his workshops usually offered for professional licensed clinicians only. So it's we are sitting with the doctors and nurses and those veterans who has been working in the same segment of the clinical world for like 5 years, 10 years, sometimes 20 years. It's a really amazing feeling. But then one of the things we do is he comes in and we sit a little bit and he says, so let me ask you everyone, what's in this room? And of course we start to say, well, glass, coaster, book, desk, hoshin, desk, tatami floor, etc., etc. Everyone says that. We just go around and say, everyone does. By now I know his trick, so I don't say anything. But he always says, but do you recognize the largest portion in this room is taken up by space? Do you recognize space is here? So I think this is his treatment of case number 3. Another thing, when you work with the people, you really recognize, many of us who are particularly ordained folks, we're so stuck up, we feel we are bodhisattvas, etc. We always forget there are so many people who are just so deeply spiritual all over the places. And if you really snap out of that me portion, you learn so much from, the patients, Again, this is around the time when I met Okumura Roshi and started to see everything just so differently. I was assigned, my supervisor in the hospice, I used to work for this inpatient unit. Inpatient unit for hospice program is utilized for acute care. In another word, if you are somebody who's trying to die in your home or in your nursing home, assisted living facility, but for some reason or another, pain management is not accurately done, or you are going through some sort of phase of declining, something happens, and then you really have to be treated in the hospital. So this is a very kind of panic-struck unit, and we had 18 units in it, and then people come and go with this, crying voice, screaming, pains, etc., etc. It's a very difficult place to be. And then my supervisor was also visiting this woman patient who lives in her own home. And one day, he was a Catholic priest. My supervisor was a Jesuit priest, very nice man, and he really trusted me. And then he said, there's this case he just can't deal with because of his Catholic background and priest background. The things she really needs to speak about, I can't really take it. And then she also feels the block in me. So she's asking somebody else to come, and someone who has least judgmental. So of course, I guess Buddhist practice is known to be least judgmental, I suppose. So I started to visit this woman. Just for the sake of record, I really don't like many other clinicians who just so freely talk about the patients. I think this is really ethically wrong. So I only talk about the people I have a written or verbal consent, legal consent, that I can really deliver their story to the others. Thankfully, I have worked for this wonderful organization called Story Corp, who interviews American people and records American people's life in National Archive in Washington, D.C. I did large numbers of interviews with hospice patients, etc., etc. So I can only talk about those group of people. This is my own professional ethics. But anyway, this lady, not going into details, God, had a tremendous difficult life. When she was a preteen, her mother remarried, and her stepfather started to physically, sexually abuse this young child. And again, this is 20 years ago. This patient was 60-something years old. So imagine at that time, we didn't have enough service like you are going to aspire to do. Excuse me. So, and then that made her very dysfunctional in society, and also made her really strong, have strong suicidal ideation. And she actually tried repeatedly to kill herself. And this is not like, imagined suicide. It's a serious suicide attempt. Most of the time, out of the three, I really feel it's quite amazing she actually survived. It's a radical way of trying to kill herself. But, the third time, she again fails to kill herself. And she wakes up and she finally come to the point feeling, she wakes up and she starts to look around and she feels, whoa, I am still alive? And then she recognizes this breath coming in, breath coming out. Whoa, I'm still alive. So she says, even if this I, little I, keep trying to kill myself, something is really just entirely supporting my life. So maybe this means I'm supposed to live. And so maybe this means I should do something about this life. So she started to go to those therapies and then support group, volunteering this, etc., etc. Going back to school, requiring new skills, getting a really good secretarial job, and she started to have this, regular income, and then started to reestablish otherwise completely messed up life. And then shortly after, she recognized there was a little lump in her breast. And it was the beginning of yet another 10 years of her, in and out of treatment and back to remission. So what she really needed to do was let out all these things and, so to speak, secrets, so to speak, she has never spoken about. And then she's also kind of frightened about this concept of reincarnation or going to heaven, so to speak, and meeting this man who abused her. Though he's already long gone, but so she really needed to explore this sense of, will I ever meet him again? And what exactly did I do after I recognized this entire universe is actually supporting me for this life? So it was a really long session, but I really felt the need of her hearing to the other people after her recovery. So she herself thought it was a very good idea to have a memorial service before she died. So what we did was she invited all of her, friends, the current friends, and then we gathered, placing her in the middle in the seat, just as we place, memorial picture in the altar. And we gathered and we spoke about my experience with this lady, etc. So it was quite amazing because it really revealed the fact that after she recognized this entire universe is supporting her to keep on living, what she did was she supported this group of people. She went to this church, and she made a major role is creating this support group and reaching out to this group of people. So these are really the fact of what she did with her past. So what you do right now really changes the meaning of the past. So it was really a wonderful thing to see. She really had this, complete sense of affirmation, so to speak. Yes, I utilized my life despite the fact of this past, but I really snapped out of my, and then instead I really started to recognize, well, I'm supported by all of this to live. Why don't I utilize this life positively? So again, you don't have to be a Buddhist practitioner. You don't have to be like a bodhisattva vow, etc., etc. You can see all of those wonderful Buddhist practitioners. I think once I read in Suzuki Roshi's commentary saying something like, once you are Buddhist, you really start to see everybody is Buddhist. I see so many wonderful practitioners and bodhisattvas among those patients. But if you are really dealing with the patients as if you are step-up doctor, therapist, counselor, poor people who are dying, you never get that teaching. You really need to really see this interconnectedness. You're also receiving the teaching from these people. So this case 3 is also a wonderful, juicy, tasty teaching. I could go on and go on, but I suppose this is the time. Yeah, I'm sorry, I spoke too long. Actually, I wanted to talk about the case number 8. This is the famous Hyakujo's wild fox. You probably know this case very easily, but I guess I'll wait until next week. Yeah. This is about law of causation, and this is about the someone who said, when you are enlightened, you will never fall into the law of causation. And then he fell into the law of causation, and he lived as a fox 500 lifetimes. And then he comes to in front of Hyakujo, a very well-known teacher, and say, please give me one-liner strong teaching so that I can snap out of this. And he says something, and then story goes, oh, okay, so he snapped out of it. It's a fantastical tale, but it's a very important, very interesting story. And then I talk about it next week. You want to take questions? Oh, yes, if you like to. I had a few requests to try to incorporate my clinical stories as people are interested in that realm of work. So I've been trying. I started to try as of today. So I'll try next week again.
Any questions, comments? Start us off with something. Let's see. I feel like I'm in the swirl of so many of these stories that was really, I feel like the umeboshi pit in somebody's mouth, just like bouncing around. But so thank you for just bringing these little bits from koans into real juicy life. And I'm thinking back to something you said early on. As you shifted from sort of a high-paying, successful, juicy work into hospice work, you talked about really needing to nail this teaching of no merit, basically, or of not existing in a bartering mentality, this for that. And I'm just thinking about how, as a society, whatever scale you look at it, local to the whole globe, we exist in this bartering, so deeply in this bartering mentality. And we're at sort of a point where consequences for that feel global. You know, when we think about climate change and biodiversity loss and extinctions, and even of our own of humanity, and so it quickly becomes this very large thing, and this feeling like there's not enough time for enough people to nail this teaching before the consequences unfold. So I wonder how you work with that.
Actually, the reason I really felt I really need to look for the right teacher and also really need to clearly see what the Buddhism is really talking about is by the time I met Okumura Roshi, I had 15 years in my past, professionally working and volunteering in the realm of end-of-life care. And then I just didn't go along very well with current medical module, which means you set up the goal. There's a goal of care. And then there's a kind of set up concept of good death and bad death. And then we kind of push all of us towards that goal. For me, that's not what I actually felt and what I saw, witnessed. So in another word, if you set up the goal of care and set up this is the right way, this is almost like taking you away from what I really need to do right now to this really conceptualized, the world should be this way. And in such and such years, we should be reaching that way. It takes me away from this reality to thoughts and concepts. And so I just didn't feel that's how people live. More humorous way. I was a very good friend of this head of a medical team of once very well-known age housing in Manhattan. My dear friend Carol used to be the head of a medical team. We don't have that housing system anymore because we are not there anymore. We don't need that specific housing. But this housing system didn't allow the residents to die in the facility. So when they are dying, they have to send the patients to our inpatient unit to die. So sometimes she calls me and says, Issan, I'm sending such and such to your unit, and please take care of him. And, etc. And once there was this man came, and then this was someone, Carol herself was, oh, Carol, I'm sorry, I'm talking about you. Carol herself was really having a really strong contact with this man. So she was also worried, and we went to visit his room. And then, he was actively dying with this, irregular breathing, etc., etc., and obviously unconscious. And then we go in and we feel, oh my goodness, this is terrible, because there's a radio right next to his head. This man is dying, and this radio is playing ta 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 ram pa 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 pam pa 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 1970s disco music. This is a 1970s disco music radio station. So we are like, oh my goodness, he's dying. It's a very important sacred moment. Let's turn this off. And we turn this off. There's such a strong self-righteousness. And then he incredibly wakes up and says, who turned off my music? And we felt, God, we've been working in this for such a long time, and we know this. Why did we do this? This self-righteousness is so, persistent. And then, of course, this is because we have some sort of concept, something has to be this way, etc., which suits me. And we really have to snap out of this, and we really have to see what suits each one of the individual for the last moment of the life. So in another word, it's a bit like that. If I'm trapped into goal of care, this person have to be die this way, etc., kind of thing, I lose the moment of things to do. So that's, I really start to see Dogen's teaching is really about this right here, right this moment, and snapping out of this me, koken, this personal view. That's what, Zuimonki often utilizes this word koken. I think current translation we are reading utilizes the word personal view, but it is about me looking at things. And then I really need to be back to right here, right now, and particularly in those very crucial moments. And I think I'm very aware of this, climate crisis, because the area I often stay for a long time is like a focal point of climate crisis. Each year we have devastating disaster going on, and many of the temple folks go to volunteer for shoveling the landslide back, and then planting new trees when landslides just completely swept the one side of the mountain, etc., etc. And then my thing is not going to this, oh, what will happen to 2050? But right now, right here, we have things to do. So it's the same thing I do with the hospice. It's the same thing you do in Zendo, and it's the same thing you do at work, you do in hospice, patient's room, and same thing with, planting trees on the landslide. It's the same one life. And that's how I view it.